You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-call. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-call. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn it off.
Good evening, welcome to the weekend. Tonight, 3 middle-aged white guys griping about government. Stay tuned. I'm Jon Caldara from the Independence Institute. You're watching Independent Thinking. You know, the most important things that go on in the state of Colorado are often among the most dry, but the most important thing here is our fiscal situation, including what's going on with the state budget and how that's going to change over time. Are we really in a tight fiscal mess, and will getting rid of our taxpayer bill of rights take care of it? To talk about it from the State House of Representatives, Kent Lambert, who knows a lot about this stuff. Glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. And Barry Poulson from the Independence Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and the University of Colorado. And you've got a lot of titles.
Yes, sir.
A man with many jobs and no good income. All right. There's a statute out there that puts together a Fiscal Stability Commission, and they've now just started. The Denver Post has been reporting on it. This is a big deal. Well, tell me a little bit about what made this new commission that I'm very skeptical of. But tell me, what is it?
Well, I think most of what it is right now, John, is political cover. I think, like most commissions that we've had in the state, whether it's Governor Ritter's, transportation or energy studies or whatever, we'll study this to death for 8 months and come up to the conclusion that they had going into it, is that we need to increase taxes, increase spending, and do exactly the same thing the Democratic agenda has had on the books, what they've been trying to do for 3 years now into Governor Ritter's administration.
And this, again, is to take a look at the fiscal stability of the state government. And color me skeptical, but my years in RTD, my battles on Tabor, I've seen these commissions come. I look at the Senate 208 commission a few years ago, which of course had a predetermined conclusion, and surprise, they came up and said government needs to get more involved in healthcare. Fast Tracks went on, did all these studies and commissions, and lo and behold, we need rail everywhere. This Stability Commission, am I wrong? And I know you're not a Politico, but am I wrong? This is really a let's find a polite way to kill Tabor commission.
Well, I think there is some truth in that. I think that there is a tendency to say, well, we've got a fiscal crisis. The fiscal crisis is caused by Tabor, our tax and spending limits. Therefore, let's get rid of Tabor. The way I approach it is, first of all, we don't have a fiscal crisis in the sense that California has a fiscal crisis. Our state is not issuing IOUs, and our debt is not downgraded. And so far, our governor hasn't gone to Washington hat in hand and said, please give me more bailout money. So we have, that's a crisis.
Let's put this in human terms, because once you start talking numbers, it's really easy to get lost. So help me understand, how big is, say, California's deficit? I mean, they are in a mess. They did not have something like the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights to protect them. Their budget went skyrocketing because of that. And then when the economy turned, they fell off a very high level. So how bad is it in California? Give me a sense. How bad is California's state budget?
Well, first of all, John, they did have an effective tax and spending limit. The Gann Amendment, which was a predecessor of our tax and spending limit, Tabor. But essentially what happened in the 1980s, the California economy was growing and prospering. Essentially, the education lobby said we've got to essentially suspend Gann. We want to get rid of our tax and spending limit, and the rest is history. Essentially, since then, in California, government's grown much more rapidly than the private sector. They've raised taxes, they've issued debt, they've created one of the worst business tax climates in the country, and not surprisingly, they've experienced retardation of economic growth. So the difference between California and Colorado at this point is the fact that we did introduce Tabor in the early 1990s, and we have kept government growth pretty much in line with the private sector. We've been able to constrain the growth of government to make sure that it's delivering good government services.
Would you call California's situation a true crisis?
Well,
a fiscal crisis?
Yes, it is, because basically, to come back to your earlier question, I mean, they have increased deficits. Their debt now, I think, is up around $32 billion, and that's the latest figure I remember seeing. $32 billion,
in other words, almost 2 times the size of our state budget. That's their deficit.
Right.
That's their deficit. All right, here in Colorado, and you have to fight with the JBC, you've got a Joint Budget Commission, you've got to deal with these things. From your point of view as a legislator, Are we in a crisis here? I mean, I keep hearing about all this.
Well, certainly not anywhere near the California problem. My understanding is a lot of the California crisis that they're hitting apparently this month has to do with bonds that they've issued that they can't pay for. They don't have the budget to pay the service on their bonds. So they may be defaulting on, I've heard upward of 24 to 26 billion just on the bonds. What happens when you go to a state and businesses and so forth invest, give money to the state in terms of bonds, and they simply default or start writing IOUs?
To put that in real simple terms, a bond is basically the government needs a big hunk of money so that they can build a bridge, they can build a building, they can build whatever it is, and they say, give us a whole bunch of money and we'll pay you back in increments and interest. And it's like a home loan. But here they're saying, we can't pay.
Well, and for the government, it's like free money. We are going to go into more debt in California, for instance. We're going to incur debt and pay it back over the long term. That's very attractive, and it invites a lot of new programs, a lot of things that are very ambitious that in the long term they can't pay for. We're seeing the same thing now happening at the federal level, and I would say I would personally say we're in a tremendous fiscal crisis at the federal level for that reason. And I think I've heard about 43% of all federal bonds, for instance, are going to come due within the next 12 months. How are you going to pay for those without tremendously inflating the cost of those bonds, interest rates, everything else? You're printing more paper. Who's going to buy it knowing that the Obama administration is just printing paper as fast as they possibly can, and the value of that bond in 30 years is not going to be worth anything? Why buy it?
Let's bring it back to the state of Colorado. Now, you've told me that we're not in a crisis.
Right.
And I know it sure feels like we're in a crisis because every government is screaming more money. Well, let's focus on the state. The governor has a few $100 million shortfall he's got to deal with. You guys have had to deal with it. Is that a crisis?
No, essentially what we're experiencing is a revenue shortfall as a result of the recession. We experienced one in 2001. We're going to experience revenue shortfalls every time there's a recession because we have a very volatile economy, one where the revenue actually is more volatile than our income in terms of fluctuations. Now that's good because we have a very dynamic economy. In the long run, we've achieved very high rates of growth, but it's also very volatile. Now,
in other words, when there's an economic downturn, people aren't buying things. People aren't buying things. They're not paying sales tax. People are letting people go, so they're not paying income tax. The state isn't going to get as much money.
Right.
It's not a big surprise. But the size of our shortfall is nothing. As you said, we're not crying. We're not going to the federal government. We're not printing up money. We're not. I mean, I look at California, $30 billion, almost two times the size of our budget. That's their debt. I mean, that's massive. They're on the verge of bankruptcy, are they not?
Absolutely. Their bonds have been downgraded, and there's only one explanation, in my view, for why Colorado has not gone down that path, and that is we have been able to constrain the growth of government, and Tabor has worked pretty much the way it was intended. In Colorado, government spending grows at the rate of inflation and population growth. If any jurisdiction, state or local, wants government to grow more rapidly, if they want to raise taxes, if they want to issue debt, all they have to do is ask the voters. And the fact is, since 1992, there have been a whole series of these ballot issues where either the state or local jurisdictions have asked voters, can we raise taxes? Can we issue debt? Can we spend surplus? Some of those have passed, some of those have failed. That's what Tabor intended.
The big part of this is this feeling that, and we get this from the spending coalitions who say we've got to do something about Tabor, but Tabor is remarkably flexible. But you have to do what every politician, R&D, hates to do. You need to go ask. And if you go ask, you need to prove that you spent the money you have wisely, and if you're going to get extra money, if you're going to keep the surplus, or if you're going to raise taxes or raise debt, you gotta ask. You know, I think, as a Republican, answer this one for me. There are a lot of Republicans who I believe hate Tabor just as much as Democrats. This is not a partisan issue. I think it's a politician issue. I don't think politicians like Tabor because it holds them more accountable and it forces them to ask for more money if they want to spend more money.